Stop me if this sounds familiar. You're surrounded by people twice your age who still throw tantrums when things don't go their way. Who blame everyone else for their problems? Who can't handle the slightest criticism without falling apart? Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Most adults never actually grew up. They just got older, collected responsibilities, and learned to hide their emotional immaturity behind job titles and social expectations. But here's what's really disturbing. You might be one of them. And before you click away thinking, "Not me," stay with me for the next few minutes, because I'm about to show you 10 traits that separate truly mature adults from overgrown children, and most people fail at 8 out of 10 of these. The scary part? These aren't complex psychological concepts. They're basic life skills that should be common sense, but they're becoming increasingly rare in our instant gratification, blame-shifting, comfort-obsessed culture. Now I know what you're thinking. Another self-help video telling me what's wrong with me. But this isn't about judgment. It's about recognition. Because once you can see these patterns clearly, both in yourself and others, everything changes. Your relationships improve. Your career accelerates. Your inner peace becomes unshakable. We're talking about the difference between reacting to life and actually living it with intention and wisdom. Here's the thing that's going to surprise you. The people who possess these traits aren't necessarily smarter, richer, or more talented than everyone else. They've just developed what I call maturity signals, specific behaviors that demonstrate genuine emotional and psychological development. But in the next few minutes, you'll discover exactly what separates truly mature adults from overgrown children, and more importantly, you'll walk away with a clear action plan to develop these traits yourself. If you're ready to discover whether you're truly as mature as you think you are, and more importantly, how to actually become the person you want to be, then hit that like button to support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into these 10 traits that most adults completely fail to develop. Trust me, number 7 is going to challenge everything you think you know about being a good person. You know what's fascinating? Most people think they know themselves, but they're actually living with a stranger. They've got this carefully crafted image of who they are, the responsible one, the victim, the misunderstood genius, and they'll defend that image to the death. But here's the thing, genuine self-awareness isn't about protecting your self-concept. It's about developing the emotional maturity to see yourself as you actually are, not as you wish you were. The ancient Greeks had it right when they carved "Know thyself" into the temple at Delphi. They understood that personal growth starts with brutal honesty about your own character. Think about the last time you made a mistake at work. Did you immediately start crafting the story of how it wasn't really your fault? How external circumstances conspired against you? That's self-deception in action. A truly mature person pauses and asks, "What part of this mess is actually on me?" They develop this psychological maturity where they can observe their own thoughts and behaviors without the desperate need to make themselves look good. It's like having an internal witness that doesn't judge, but simply sees. This isn't about beating yourself up. It's about developing the self-development skills to recognize your patterns before they sabotage you. The problem with our modern society is that we've got endless ways to avoid uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Social media feeds us constant validation. Therapy culture sometimes enables victim mentality, and our echo chambers reflect back exactly what we want to hear. But wisdom isn't found in comfort. It's found in those moments when you catch yourself being petty, jealous, or dishonest, and instead of explaining it away, you sit with that discomfort. You let it teach you something about your authentic character that you didn't want to acknowledge. Here's what separates emotionally mature adults from grown-up children. Mature adults can hold two contradictory truths about themselves simultaneously. They can acknowledge that they're both capable of great kindness and shocking selfishness. They don't need to be either perfectly good or irredeemably bad. This intellectual humility creates space for genuine character development because you're not constantly defending a false image of yourself. But knowing who you are is just the beginning. The real test comes when life cranks up the pressure and your true nature starts showing. When the heat's on, most adults transform into emotional toddlers. They explode, they shut down, they blame everyone else for their feelings. Sound familiar? The Stoics understood something that modern psychology is just catching up to. Your emotions aren't facts, and they're certainly not your master. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, and betrayals, yet he wrote about maintaining inner strength regardless of external chaos. That's not because he was superhuman, it's because he developed the leadership qualities that come from emotional regulation. He understood that true power isn't controlling others, it's controlling your own responses. Let me paint you a picture. You're in a meeting, and your boss publicly criticizes your project. Your heart starts racing, your face gets hot, and every fiber of your being wants to either lash out or crawl under the table. Here's where emotional maturity separates the adults from the children. Instead of reacting immediately, you create space between the trigger and your response. You might think, okay, I'm feeling attacked right now. That's understandable. But what's the wise response here? This isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about developing the psychological maturity to feel them without being controlled by them. The modern world is designed to keep you emotionally reactive. Social media algorithms profit from your outrage. News cycles feed on your anxiety. Even workplace cultures often reward drama over composure. But here's what they don't tell you. People are desperately looking for someone who can stay calm in the storm. They gravitate toward those rare individuals who possess genuine inner strength. When everyone else is losing their minds, the person who can think clearly becomes invaluable. That's not just emotional intelligence, that's practical wisdom in action. But here's the real secret. Emotional regulation isn't about becoming a robot. It's about responding from your values rather than your impulses. When you're angry, ask yourself, how would the person I want to become handle this? When you're afraid, consider, what would courage look like right now? This kind of self-awareness creates space for authentic living instead of reactive living. And once you start responding instead of reacting, you'll discover something interesting about responsibility. Here's a hard truth most people can't stomach. You are 100% responsible for your life. Not for what happens to you, that's often beyond your control, but for how you respond to what happens to you. This is where most adults fail spectacularly. They've become experts at explaining why their circumstances, their childhood, their boss, or their bad luck is responsible for their current situation. But personal growth doesn't begin until you stop looking for someone to blame and start looking for something to change. The existentialists got this right. You're condemned to be free, meaning you can't escape the responsibility of choosing your response. I'm not talking about toxic positivity or pretending that trauma doesn't matter. I'm talking about the mature mindset that says, okay, this happened, it sucked. Now what am I going to do about it? Consider someone who grew up in poverty. They can spend their entire life explaining why they can't succeed because of their background, or they can say, my circumstances were challenging, and now I'm responsible for what I do with that experience. The first response keeps you stuck. The second response gives you power. That's the difference between victim mentality and accountability. The victim mentality is seductive because it feels like protection. If everything bad in your life is someone else's fault, then you don't have to face the terrifying possibility that you might need to change. But here's what victim thinking actually costs you: agency. When you blame external factors for your problems, you give away your power to solve them. Ancient wisdom traditions understood this. The Stoics taught that while you can't control what happens to you, you can control your judgments about what happens to you. That's not just philosophy, that's practical life skills. True responsibility isn't about self-blame or guilt. It's about recognizing that you have more power than you think. Even in difficult circumstances, you can choose your attitude, your effort, your response. This doesn't mean everything is fair or that systemic issues don't exist. It means that within whatever constraints you face, you still have choices. And mature adults focus on the choices they have rather than the ones they don't. But taking responsibility is easier said than done, especially when modern society offers constant temptation for instant gratification. We're living in the age of "I want it now." Same-day delivery, instant streaming, immediate responses to texts. Our entire economy is built around eliminating the space between desire and satisfaction. But here's the thing. That space between wanting something and getting it? That's where character development happens. Aristotle called it temperance, the ability to moderate your desires according to reason rather than impulse. Every mature adult has learned to surf the wave of wanting without immediately giving in to it. Think about your financial decisions. Do you buy what you want when you want it, or do you pause and consider the long-term impact? The difference isn't just about money. It's about developing the psychological maturity to distinguish between what you want now and what you actually need. Most adults are walking around in financial stress because they never learned this basic life skill. They see something they want, they feel that hit of desire, and they reach for their credit card. But mature adults have trained themselves to ask better questions. Will this matter in 5 years? Am I buying this to solve a real problem or just to feel better right now? The scary part is how this instant gratification mindset bleeds into everything. Relationships, career decisions, personal growth. We want immediate results or we give up. You start working out and expect to see changes in a week. You read one self-development book and wonder why your life hasn't transformed. But wisdom accumulates slowly. Character development is a long game. The ancient philosophers understood this. They didn't expect to become wise overnight. They committed to daily practices that would compound over time. Here's what separates emotionally mature people from the rest. They've learned to find satisfaction in the process, not just the outcome. They understand that the discipline of waiting, of working towards something over time, actually creates more fulfillment than instant gratification ever could. When you can delay gratification, you're not just exercising self-control. You're building confidence in your ability to stick to your values even when it's difficult. But this kind of self-mastery requires something most adults struggle with: admitting they don't know everything. You know what's exhausting? Pretending you know more than you do. Most adults walk around acting like they've got it all figured out, terrified that someone might discover they're still learning, still making mistakes, still confused about half the stuff they encounter. But here's the paradox that Socrates understood. True wisdom begins with acknowledging your ignorance. The smartest people you'll ever meet are the ones who freely admit what they don't know. That's not weakness. That's intellectual humility, and it's becoming extinct in our know-it-all culture. Now here's where it gets interesting. Intellectual humility isn't just about admitting ignorance. It's about how you handle being corrected. Most adults treat criticism like a personal attack on their character. Someone points out they're wrong about something, and immediately the defenses go up. "Well, actually," becomes their favorite phrase. But mature adults have developed the emotional intelligence to separate their ego from their opinions. They can hear "you're wrong about that" without hearing "you're worthless as a person." That's a superpower in disguise. Turns out your ego isn't made of glass and won't shatter from one honest comment. Watch how most people handle conversations, and you'll see ego-driven behavior everywhere. They're not listening to understand. They're listening to respond, to prove their point, to demonstrate their superior knowledge. They've turned every interaction into a competition rather than a collaboration. But genuine curiosity transforms everything. Instead of thinking, "How can I show how smart I am?" mature adults think, "What can I learn from this person?" This shift from ego-driven conversation to learning-driven conversation opens up entirely new possibilities for personal growth and authentic connections. The beautiful thing about staying teachable is that it actually makes you more trustworthy and more influential. When you can say, "I don't know, tell me more," or "I was wrong about that, thanks for the correction," people immediately respect you more. They're so used to dealing with defensive, know-it-all adults that intellectual humility stands out like a beacon. You become the person others want to share ideas with because they know you won't attack them for thinking differently. But this kind of openness requires something else most adults struggle with: making smart decisions about money. Here's a brutal truth that most adults refuse to face. Your financial decisions reveal more about your character than almost anything else. We live in a culture that's designed to separate you from your money as quickly as possible, and most people fall for it completely. They buy cars they can't afford to impress people they don't even like, finance lifestyles that require them to work jobs they hate, and then wonder why they feel trapped. But financial maturity isn't about making more money. It's about developing the wisdom to distinguish between what you want and what you actually need. The Stoics understood that true freedom comes from needing less, not having more. Marcus Aurelius was literally the most powerful man in the world, yet he wrote about the dangers of attachment to material possessions. That's not because money is evil, it's because financial desperation makes you vulnerable to manipulation and bad decisions. When you're living paycheck to paycheck because of lifestyle inflation, you can't take risks, you can't help others, and you certainly can't walk away from toxic situations. Financial maturity gives you options, and options give you power. But here's what separates financially mature adults from everyone else. They've learned to find satisfaction in having margin rather than having stuff. They get more pleasure from seeing their savings grow than from acquiring the latest gadgets. They understand that every dollar spent on something unnecessary is a dollar not working for their future freedom. This isn't about being cheap or depriving yourself. It's about being intentional with your resources. It's about asking, does this purchase move me closer to or further from the life I actually want? Here's a simple test. Use the 48-hour rule for any non-essential purchase over $100. Wait 2 days. If you still want it and can explain how it serves your actual goals, then consider it. The real test of financial maturity comes when everyone around you is making financially stupid decisions and you have to stay disciplined anyway. Your friends are leasing expensive cars, your colleagues are buying houses they can barely afford, and social media is constantly showing you what you should be buying to be successful. Mature adults have developed the self-awareness to recognize these influences and the inner strength to resist them. They know that real wealth isn't about looking rich. It's about having screw you money, even if you're too polite to ever say it. But speaking of choices, there's another area where most adults completely lose their way. Boundaries. Most adults either don't have them at all, or they build walls instead of fences. They're either people pleasers who can't say no to save their lives, or they're so aggressive about protecting their space that they push everyone away. But mature adults understand that healthy boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about creating the conditions where authentic relationships can thrive. This is where emotional intelligence meets practical wisdom. Let me give you a real-world example. Your friend keeps calling you late at night to complain about their relationship problems. You want to be supportive, but it's affecting your sleep and your own well-being. Most people handle this in one of two ways. They either suffer in silence and eventually resent their friend, or they explode and say something hurtful. But a mature response sounds different. I care about you and want to support you, and I need to protect my sleep schedule. Can we set up a regular time to talk when I'm more available? Notice the structure: care, boundary, alternative. The reason boundary setting feels so difficult is that we've been taught to confuse boundaries with selfishness. But here's the truth: you can't give what you don't have. If you're constantly drained because you can't say no, you're not actually helping anyone. You're just creating resentment that will eventually poison your relationships. Mature adults understand that taking care of themselves isn't selfish, it's responsible. They recognize that their emotional and mental health are resources that need to be managed wisely. The magic happens when you can set boundaries from a place of love rather than anger. When you're clear about your limits before you reach your breaking point, you can communicate them calmly and kindly. People actually respect you more when you're honest about what works for you and what doesn't. But setting external boundaries is the easy part. The real challenge is being honest with yourself about who you really are. Here's where most people's personal growth journey hits a brick wall. The moment they have to face something about themselves they don't like. Maybe you're more selfish than you want to admit. Maybe you're not as smart as you thought. Maybe your problems really are mostly your fault. These uncomfortable truths are like psychological kryptonite. They make most adults curl up into a ball and start making excuses. But here's what Nietzsche understood: you can't overcome what you won't acknowledge. Character development requires looking at your shadow, not just your highlights. I'll give you a personal example that might hit close to home. Maybe you pride yourself on being a good listener, but if you're honest, you realize you often interrupt people or mentally prepare your response while they're still talking. That's an uncomfortable truth. Your choice is simple. You can either defend your self-image by making excuses, "I was just excited, they weren't getting to the point," or you can use this insight to actually become the good listener you thought you already were. The first choice protects your ego. The second choice transforms your behavior. Now, I'm not talking about becoming your own worst critic here. The problem is that our culture has confused healthy self-acceptance with self-deception. We're told to love yourself as you are, which somehow gets translated into never admit you need to change anything. But real self-acceptance includes accepting the parts of yourself that need work. Mature adults can hold both truths simultaneously. I'm worthy of love and respect, and I have areas where I need to grow. This isn't self-criticism, it's self-awareness. When you can see your flaws clearly, you can actually do something about them. Here's the liberating truth: everyone has ugly parts of their personality. The difference between mature and immature adults is that mature ones admit it. They don't pretend to be perfect, so they don't have to defend their imperfections. They can say, "Yeah, I can be petty sometimes," or "I struggle with jealousy," without their entire identity crumbling. This kind of compassionate honesty, being real with yourself without being brutal, creates space for genuine growth and authentic connections. But once you start seeing yourself clearly, you'll also need to develop a different relationship with others. Most people confuse empathy with people-pleasing, but they're completely different animals. People-pleasing is about managing other people's emotions, so they'll like you. It's manipulative, exhausting, and ultimately dishonest. Genuine empathy is about understanding someone's experience without taking responsibility for fixing their feelings. It's the difference between emotional maturity and emotional codependency. Mature adults can care deeply about others without losing themselves in the process. Here's what people-pleasing looks like in action. Your colleague is upset about a work decision, so you immediately start trying to make them feel better. You agree with their complaints, even if you don't. You offer solutions they haven't asked for, and you walk away feeling drained and resentful. Now here's what genuine empathy looks like. You listen to their frustration, you validate their feelings by saying something like, "That sounds really frustrating," and then you let them have their experience without trying to fix it. You care without taking responsibility for their emotional state. The trap of people-pleasing is that it feels like kindness, but it's actually a form of control. You're trying to manage other people's emotions because their bad moods make you uncomfortable. But authentic empathy means you can sit with someone in their discomfort without needing to make it go away. You can offer support without offering solutions. You can care without carrying their burden. This kind of emotional intelligence allows for much deeper, more honest relationships because people feel truly seen rather than managed. The beautiful thing about genuine empathy is that it actually helps people more than people-pleasing ever could. When you resist the urge to immediately fix or rescue, you give others the space to process their own experiences and develop their own resilience. You're not enabling their emotional dependence, you're respecting their ability to handle their own lives. But this level of authentic connection requires something most adults struggle with: knowing what you're actually living for. Most adults are living by accident. They wake up, go through the motions, seek whatever pleasure they can find, and wonder why life feels so empty. They've confused activity with purpose, busyness with meaning. But mature adults understand something profound. Pleasure is a terrible master, but a wonderful servant. When you organize your life around immediate gratification, whether that's entertainment, food, shopping, or even work success, you end up feeling hollow because you're not connected to anything larger than your own temporary desires. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in concentration camps, observed that those who survived weren't necessarily the physically strongest, but those who had something to live for beyond themselves. Purpose isn't some mystical concept. It's about organizing your daily choices around values that transcend your immediate comfort. Maybe that's raising kids who become good humans, creating something useful, serving a cause you believe in, or developing wisdom you can share. The specific purpose matters less than having one that pulls you forward when life gets difficult. Here's what happens when you live without purpose. Every decision becomes about immediate cost-benefit analysis. Should I exercise today? Well, it's uncomfortable, so probably not. Should I have that difficult conversation with my partner? It might be awkward, so maybe later. Should I invest time in learning something challenging? It's easier to watch Netflix. But when you're clear about what you're building toward, these decisions become easier. You do hard things not because they feel good, but because they serve something you care about more than your comfort. The modern world is designed to distract you from developing authentic purpose. Consumer culture tells you that happiness comes from acquiring things. Social media convinces you that meaning comes from likes and followers. But mature adults have developed the wisdom to see through these substitutes. They understand that genuine fulfillment comes from contributing to something beyond themselves, whether that's family, community, craft, or cause. They've learned to find deep satisfaction in the process of becoming who they're meant to be, not just in getting what they want. So here's the moment of truth. Which of these 10 traits hit you right in the gut? Because if you're being honest with yourself, and honesty is trait number 1, remember, at least a few of these probably made you uncomfortable. Good. That discomfort isn't weakness, it's your growth edge calling. But here's what separates people who watch self-development content from people who actually develop themselves. Action. You can nod along to every point I've made, feel inspired for about 20 minutes, and then go right back to your old patterns. Or you can pick one, just one, of these traits and commit to practicing it for the next 30 days. Not all 10. Not a complete life overhaul. Just one trait that you know would genuinely change your life if you developed it. Let me ask you something that might sting a little. What would the people closest to you say is your biggest maturity blind spot? Your partner, your kids, your closest friends, they see things about you that you can't see about yourself. Are you brave enough to ask them? Because true maturity means being more interested in truth than comfort, more committed to growth than protection of your ego. Here's what I know about the people watching this channel. You're not here for surface-level feel-good content. You're here because you want the kind of deep, practical wisdom that actually transforms lives. You want to understand the psychology behind human behavior, the philosophy that creates unshakable character, and the real-world strategies that turn knowledge into power. That's exactly what we deliver here at Timeless Advice. Content that challenges you to become the person you're capable of being, not just the person you are today. If this video gave you at least one insight that made you think differently about yourself or others, do me a favor. Smash that like button. It tells YouTube that this kind of content matters, that there are still people who want substance over fluff. And if you're serious about developing genuine maturity and wisdom, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we dive deep into the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern psychology every single week. But here's my challenge to you, and this is where the real growth happens. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Not to criticize them, not to point out their flaws, but because you genuinely believe it could help them grow. That's what mature adults do. They share valuable insights not to feel superior, but to lift others up. Drop a comment below and tell me, which trait are you going to work on first? And which one do you see missing most in the adults around you? Because building a community of people committed to genuine maturity, that's how we change, not just ourselves, but the entire culture around us. Remember, Maturity isn't about age. It's about choice. Every day, in every interaction, you get to choose whether you'll react like a child or respond like the adult you want to become. Your future self is counting on the decisions you make today. Make them count.